because a lot of the agentic risks that you're talking about, Ben, they're already here, and the rate at which they're evolving is speeding up.
Welcome to Human in the Loop. I'm Ben Scharfstein, and I lead product for enterprise solutions here at Scale. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve and Angela. Angela, want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ben. I'm Angela. I lead our product acceleration for safety and red teaming here at Scale. Steve?
And I'm Steve Kelling. I'm the director for safety and red teaming at Scale.
Awesome. And I've brought Steve and Angela here today, and we're going to talk about red teaming in the enterprise. Steve, maybe you could just give us a quick intro for those who aren't familiar. What is red teaming?
Yeah, red teaming is our advanced diagnostic product for AI models. And it is essentially a process wherein we're trying to get the model to break its own policy. So in a lot of cases, this is safety policies that all the big labs have to control the content it gives its users. We try to generate that content to help them make decisions about how to better control the behaviors of their models.
Maybe could you talk about what are some examples of where red teaming could have been helpful for some of those big model labs in the past? I know there's been tons of incidents. Maybe you could give some examples of for consumer products where red teaming would have been helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of examples, and this is one of the reasons that we are engaged to help our customers navigate their policy decisions and also their corrective data to train the right behaviors into their models. Things like giving away cars for free on a dealership website, or diversity topics in generation of images of people are some of the ones that have had a lot of visibility.
Yeah. I remember Google had a lot of press about some of their early Gemini models and image generation models. What makes enterprise red teaming different than just kind of consumer red teaming for a general product like ChatGPT or Gemini?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you look at all of the foundation models like Gemini and GPT, as you mentioned, they're sort of trained to be kind of the average of all things. They have to be capable of anything that a huge user base is going to throw at them. And so they're essentially pre-trained on what's effectively an extremely large sample of the internet. Enterprise problems and capabilities are a bit different, right? Enterprises have a specific thing that they're trying to accomplish. It's why they exist. And as such, the types of harms that they're going to be worried about are also far more specific. So an example might be if you're operating in financial services and you want to put a general model on your website, a generative model on your website, you are probably going to be worried about that model incorrectly dispensing regulated financial advice. You might not be worried about hate speech and diversity topics, but it actually doesn't mean that you don't need to worry about those kind of things. And that's one of the things that we help with is, of course, we'll do really deep, concentrated red teaming attacks on those topics that our customers are most worried about. But we also help them find the things that they're not worried about.
What do you mean by that? When you say find the things they're not worried about?
Yeah. So again, if you're coming from a financial services perspective, you're probably very worried about the provision of regulated advice by a model. You'll want to make sure that it's appropriately wrapping things in disclaimer language, not giving advice that is very personalized to the user. You might not have hate speech as a top of mind concern, but it's absolutely something that you want to make sure your model's not doing, because these are the kind of things that get a lot of unwanted media attention and ultimately can precipitate some real reputation risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that we've seen is sometimes when you go too far with guardrails and when you get kind of over lawyered, you go away from actually being a useful product into something that is just not even able to answer simple questions.
What we've seen recently from many enterprise clients who come to us is, if you think of deploying an AI model or application and you're thinking you want it to be helpful for the user, for what they're asking, what they're intending to do, and at the same time you want it to be harmless and not break content policies, such as Steve was saying, we are seeing a lot of models and applications veer towards the overly lawyered, overly strict, overly kind of restrictive models. And we see that through many facets. For example, over refusal of a lot of questions that should be safe and should be answered. So one thing we really try to gear the product teams in enterprises towards is, what are your use cases? What are your users? And let's simulate those behaviors so that we will help you test for all of the harmful scenarios, but at the same time, we also help you calibrate between the helpful and harmless scenarios.
Yeah. What's the relationship between guardrails and red teaming? Because, it seems like they're kind of two sides of the same coin. I don't know, maybe Steve, you can talk about that.
Yeah, I think the important thing to think about is that the acceptance of things that are coming from these models, from the base models, is really evolving quite rapidly. So what this looks like in practice is that we're seeing from all the big labs significantly more permissive models being released over time. Models today are less guarded than they were a year ago. And so the significance of that when you think about your guardrails as an enterprise is that you might be relying on these models downstream in the applications that you're putting on your own website or using with your employees. And your policies may not have changed the way that public acceptance of the general technology has changed. And so it's really important that you have a sense of where the models are best suited to be adapted to your enterprise, and then how you implement controls around that generative capability that still respects the experience you're trying to create. So a familiarity with the policies that need to control your behavior, the regulations that are going, like I mentioned, financial services, again, this is actually regulated content. So it's important that you understand the capabilities of the model that's providing the generation so that you can wrap the right controls or guardrails around it in your application.
Yeah. I think there's also an interesting aspect here, which is part of red teaming may be about voice, and not saying something that is offensive. But there's another part of red teaming which can be about not saying things that might be malicious, or, to your point around regulated, working in a regulated industry, you obviously don't want to give financial advice if that's against policy. Angela, can you talk through kind of both the personas of the types of people that are trying to attack models and trying to attack applications, as well as kind of where the attack vectors are?
First, it's important to understand, of course, not every user is malicious, but not every user is safe. And we kind of evaluate the spectrum of users across intent and across skill. We simulate these type of users in our testing because if a benign user, just through regular prompting, simple turn, multi-turn, if I get to a harmful output while I'm not intending to get it, that's kind of a very big deal. That's a big risk for enterprises and can lead to real world harm. Then you have two types of users that are really, you can think of them as potentially less than 10% of all users, but this is where the malicious users reside. So first, you kind of have the ones that are unskilled, low resourced. I want to poke at an enterprise application to maybe, do a PR nightmare for a company I don't like. And then the last category of users, which is really the most harmful, are the highly skilled and highly resourced. And this is what our expert red teamers at scale simulate. This is where, if you are really a pro red teamer, what can you get the model to do? In our methodology, while doing red teaming, we do what we call a threat matrix, or a heat map of a threat matrix, where we actually combine those attack vectors with the types of harms. So attack vectors, you can think of it as, what are the types of tactics that I can use to manipulate the model? And some of them are technical, so it can be injecting code, it can be really manipulating the system prompts of the models. Some of them are non-technical and they rely through prompting, whether it's text prompting, whether it's including images, files, and you'd be surprised at the types of harms you can get through prompting by obfuscation, fictionalization. You have up to 50 kind of types of tactics that can be employed. Then when we think of the types of harms, we like to separate them in content harm and enablement harm. Content harm is if you're getting an output from the model that is veering towards misinformation, hate speech, a content that is actually harmful, according to the policies of the company. Enablement harm is really extreme. This is where the content, the harmful content of the model can enable you to do real world harm.
Yeah, in a previous episode of Human in the Loop, I kind of made this analogy of from Web 1.0, where it's, the web was just reading, and that's kind of been mostly what chat LM agents have been, chatbots. And then we're moving towards this world, like the Web 2.0 world equivalent in Gen AI, where you have not just the ability to read or interact and have a conversation, but also to write and take action in the real world. And it seems like in that paradigm shift from chatbots to agents, red teaming is going to become vastly more important, because the harm isn't just brand risk or exposing a system prompt or something that is relatively benign. It is now these agents are taking action, right? They're booking a flight, and it's the most simple example. But in an enterprise, they're reading customer data. They may be able to change the permissions on your account. And if you don't really understand what's possible, you don't understand what your attack vectors are, and you're not testing for it, there's going to be a lot more harm that's going to be able to be done as these their uses of Gen AI move from chatbots into agents that have agency and are doing things. What can enterprises do? What is the best way to protect yourself against all of these threat vectors, especially as we move into a more agentic world where LMs are also taking action, tool calling, having access to more and more data and more resources?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be building assessment capabilities yourselves, or partnering with somebody like us who can implement very quick turnarounds of agentic testing. Well, any of the modalities that we've talked about. I think this is something that we need to see with all of our customers, is implementation of strong, responsible AI programs that considers both where the technology is out today, but also the capabilities that you're building into your applications that will be deployed tomorrow. Because a lot of the agentic risks that you're talking about, Ben, they're already here, and the rate at which they're evolving is speeding up. So that's the first thing. And then I think making sure that you've got strong governance around releases, that you can demonstrate that you've put that sort of scrutiny on your own products is really just a critical step for all of our partners.
Yeah. I think another thing, we were talked earlier about evals, red teaming, and guardrails. One way that I like to think about it is that evals raise the bar for what your agent or what your workflow can do. So you think about, hey, we're trying to increase the accuracy of what's going on. And red teaming is about raising the floor and say that we want to make sure bad things don't happen. It's not just in the success case, did we do a great job, but also in the failure case, whether it's accidental, as you were talking about, Angela, whether it's malicious from the perspective of someone who just wants to make it look bad, or malicious in that they actually want to take action and do something harmful. Regardless of which type of attack vector it is, we want to make sure that those things aren't possible without harming our accuracy or our quality or whatever on the top line. And then the last thing is, like, in practice, what you need to do is set up guardrails, right? And those can be on inputs. So you can look at the prompt that's getting injected and say, hey, is this trying to do something malicious? Is this trying to trick me across the attack vectors that you talked about, Angela? And then you can also look at the outputs. Was the output of this thing something that ended up being malicious or not, or brand unsafe, or et cetera? And then, of course, there's various levels of sophistication. There's cost concerns and latency and all those types of things. But these are the types of things that we see are kind of our customers on the forefront of deploying AI in production. These are the things that they're thinking about, the level of complexity that we're helping them, drive towards, but also is really important to them from the first conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll add to that, Ben, is I think it's very important to establish a feedback loop between all of what you talked about. And Steve mentioned governance, and part of it is really thinking of all the AI applications and products you want to put out in the world, and do a rigorous red teaming, safety, schedule for those. So for example, pre-product launch, we see a lot of our clients kind of doing red teaming with us, and based on the results of that, they decide a go or no go for the product launch. And then even after you launch it, after understanding the risks, because no product will be, let's say, 100% absolutely safe from your perspective, but it's safe enough to launch. After you launch it, you continue doing tests periodically because, as we've talked about, the base models are changing, user interactions are changing, and you tune the guardrails and you tune the safety data.
How is red teaming changing in a world of agents? As the scope and complexity is increasing and the types of things that these agents can do are increasing, how does that change the red teaming world and what you guys are all thinking about day to day?
It's certainly increased the complexity of the operating environment. I think some of our earliest agentic red teaming, the biggest complexity was setting up meaningful test environments that were not in the real world. So helping our customers understand, is this agent going to facilitate a financial transaction in an environment where we weren't actually implementing the harm that we were testing for? Adds not only the user sort of persona or expertise that we need in our red teamers, but also making sure that we've got really strong intersection with our engineering team so that we can quite quickly spin up tests in environments that represent the real world.
Yeah. I think that's like one of the biggest complexities in general with whether it's evaluations or red teaming or guardrails, is that we're trying to model uncommon things. We're trying to model the edge cases, and we don't want to actually take these actions. So you need to think about, how do we get representative data, representative environments that model the real world closely enough and all of the complexity of the edge cases? And then how do we integrate this into systems that can simulate and kind of we can deploy those simulations?
I want to emphasize on this point, I think there's a lot of excitement and at the same time a lot of fear around deploying AI applications. And this is exactly the point of red teaming. You'd be surprised at how creative red teamers can get and what creative scenarios they can simulate. It doesn't mean this will happen in the real world when you put the application out, but it means it's going to show you the limits. And you need to have really strong product policies, safety policies, and what are we going to do about each of these scenarios, and develop a familiarity with your users. Some things are maybe quite benign. If, let's say, the AI displays something that is a content harm but not an enablement harm, if you position it in the right way, like, hey, I'm an AI application, I'm still learning, your users might be able to forgive that. They understand. But we're trying to simulate the edge cases to avoid the really harmful consequences that can happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important part, is you don't necessarily need to stop everything, right? That's not the goal. But the first goal of red teaming is to understand what is possible. And then the second goal is to figure out, okay, we need to make a product decision about what we want to allow, what attack vectors we're okay with. And it could be, the way you solve these things is not to say it can't answer, but like you said, to give context on the answer. I'm an AI, I'm still learning. This is not, you can't necessarily trust these results. And once you have the visibility there, you can then make a product decision. And, going back to what we said all the way at the beginning, I think a lot of companies historically, they just didn't have the visibility, and then they were very scared. So they put in way too much content policies, way too much just in the prompt. And then we got unuseful or unhelpful AIs. Now we're going the other direction, where more things are becoming permissible. There's models that, have no policy restrictions at all. And now you need to kind of triangulate on what is right for you. Amazing. Well, I think that's all we have for the discussion today on red teaming for enterprises. If this type of work sounds interesting, if you want to join this team of red teamers that get to try to help our customers stay safe, we're hiring. Check out the careers page for openings, and we're also hiring across a bunch of different roles at scale. Stay tuned for more discussions on enterprise AI topics, and feel free to let us know if you let us know in the comments about what you want to hear about. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And thanks so much, Steve and Angela, for such a great conversation. I learned a bunch.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ben. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Ben.